listening to Tales from the Tannoy with Elinor Hamilton.
If you live in London, I might just have accompanied you to work, even though you didn't ask me to. It's my voice that delivers tube announcements on the Underground.
Apart from today's planned engineering works, there are no other reported delays.
My husband Phil Sayer is usually quite close by too.
Mind the gap.
We've worked together for almost 20 years, but unlike most happily married couples, we don't see each other anymore. In 2016, Phil passed away, leaving me and our 10-year-old twin boys minding a very big gap. Every voice we hear in our day-to-day lives has a backstory though. It's not just me and Phil. And everyone who does this kind of job is a real person, even though the sentences we speak are often rearranged by a computer without us knowing it. Most people only talk back to us when we get information wrong or tell you that we couldn't scan the item. In Series 2, I'm going to have conversations with the voices inside lifts.
The lift is now travelling at 1,400 feet per minute.
Supermarket checkouts.
All of your Tesco points add up.
And lottery draws.
Let's release those big money balls!
But in this episode, I'm going to talk to a voice that's familiar to viewers on Channel 4.
First up, we have Jon Snow and Kathy Newman. Tonight's Channel 4 News. 9 tonight, a brand new grand design. An upside-down 4-bedroom shed. Who are these people?
Barra Fitzgibbon's delightful voice has soothed viewers for years. But actually, the conversations he was having on the television started to feel a little bit one way. So, Barra, you decided to focus on listening as well. Can you tell me how that came about?
About 4 or maybe 5 years ago now, I began to become quite interested in talking in conversations. And the reason why that happened was because I had some real domestic challenges going on. In particular, he won't mind me talking about it because we talk about it freely now, but in particular in relation to my son. He's now 19. He was 14 at the time. And we had a super challenging relationship. You know, it needed attention. So it got to a stage where it became quite dark. So I felt like I needed to do something. And I remember somebody saying to me, look, have you ever thought about doing or reading about talking and just how you talk to him? And I was thinking, I'm so cynical about it. I was thinking, what are you talking about? I haven't got time for that, you know. But I gave it a go and it just began this absolute obsession because I began to practice what I read with him. So small, it took time, Eleanor, don't get me wrong, it took time, but small benefits coming through pretty quickly. And so I was reading, devouring it, and then kind of doing it at the same time. That's quite a powerful combination. Yeah. But then I started doing it and I started, you know, right down to going into Costa for a coffee, you know, whatever conversation would come across me, I'd embrace it as if this is going to be the one that's going to change my life. So I sort of think what I'm trying to say is the journey of this was 4 years ago. So I think I was on the path. It was more an obsession. I wasn't thinking about career change. I was still working at Channel 4, plowing along with my life, but doing this at the weekends or doing it on my days off in the week. And then when I got COVID, Eleanor, that's when it just crystallized for me. And actually, it's really poignant that we're talking because it's coming up to a year.
Right.
March the 13th is when I actually went into hospital, and I had it about 2 weeks before then. So it's getting close to the anniversary for me. And that's when I realized, when I was in there in the hospital bed, just the conversations that were playing out, and I mean conversations with the paramedic when she arrived and brought me into the back of the ambulance, the conversations from the hospital bed with the nurses, the consultants, everybody in ICU, the cleaners. I just saw how these conversations, some of them are really helping and some of them were really not helping. Right. And so then I realized this is it. This is what I need to be doing. So when I came out of COVID and when I recovered, it took me months to get kind of back. I caught it in March. By July, I was feeling kind of good again to kind of do things. I just threw myself into writing up programs and setting up a new business. And that's what I do now.
Right. So tell me about the COVID situation. And do you know where you caught it even? Because you caught it very early on.
Yeah, it was the first wave. And I remember it was the week where, you know, the UK was pretty slow to lock down. I remember Ireland, being Irish, I remember Paddy's Day being cancelled. And I remember thinking, geez, that's a big thing. So everybody else was locking down. I have a theory. I think it was at an event, which was like a graduation event. And I think perhaps, you know, there was a lot of people from different parts of the world to that event. So, you know, perhaps, who knows? They never quite tied that down. And it began just, you know, with a cough that I thought I was able to handle quite easily. Then the cough slowly got worse. Then think about COVID, and I have said this before, I think COVID is very intelligent. Now, I remember my dad saying to me, are you trying to give a virus an intelligence? And I was going, yeah, because this thing is clever, because it kept giving me false hope. So like I feel really rough on a Monday, but I feel better on a Tuesday. And then I was worse on the Wednesday. You know, it was this real kind of roller coaster.
A lot of people have said that, haven't they? That, you know, you think you're getting better and then all of a sudden it hits you again. Worse than it did, 2 days ago. And that's really unusual for an illness, isn't it? It
is. It was fascinating. It was a roller coaster illness initially. And then I think this is what the doctors were talking about towards the end of my stay in ICU, we believe that there's a genetic connection. So I think what happens, and I'm not an expert, and I do say this with the caveat that I'm not a doctor, but I do think it comes in. And then if you have a genetic weakness, I think what COVID does is it gets that genetic weakness up and running within your system. Because it transpired when I came out of hospital, I didn't know this. My mum is a sufferer of pneumonia. But her dad, my grandfather, was also a sufferer of pneumonia, and in 1923 had caught the Spanish flu. Oh. So I was thinking, geez, this is actually being handed down to me. You know, this is the genetic run on mum's side of the family. Because I ended up getting, thanks, Mum. Thanks, Granddad, as well. The tall, debonair, handsome chap. Thanks for giving me the pandemic. But once I started becoming breathless, I rang up 111. They got an ambulance really quick out to me, straight in, into the hospital. And actually, I remember the paramedic in the back of the ambulance, Eleanor, was now in hindsight, we could sort of look at it with a smile. But she said to me, I think you're going to be a statistic. Right. Which I thought, well, this is not the best kind of conversation to be having with the patient. But I did kind of think, does she mean I've got COVID, or does she mean I'm going to die, or what was it going to be? Anyway, so I went in, and it transpired that I had double pneumonia, and I had a chest infection. And in a couple of days, I was about to get sepsis, which I got from the hospital. A&E were brilliant. A&E are brilliant. And Lewisham, I can see Lewisham Hospital from my loft window as I'm talking to you here. And I often look out and give myself a bit of a blessing, because they're an extraordinary bunch of people. Yeah. And when people save your life, they become even more extraordinary, and that emotional connection will never leave me. But the A&E doctor came in to me and she said to me, Barra, I want you to know that we're going to do everything we can to save you. So, I mean, I'd just been swabbed. So I was like, well, hang on. Do we know this is COVID? And I got quite angry because I didn't feel, I got very scared, and I did get angry with her. And, we had a bit of strong words, but she was clearly brilliant. She clearly knew her stuff. And, she was amazing because she kept in touch with me during the whole hospital visit. So despite those kind of war of words initially, she kept sending me messages and notes while I was in hospital. And it was a really uplifting thing. And actually her words of, we will do everything to save you, came back again and again and again with other consultants and doctors. So it was in the end, it was a shocking thing to hear initially, but it became words of comfort eventually. So I went into the ward, went on to oxygen, but my SATs couldn't maintain. Now, my SATs, for those who don't know what that is, it's just your oxygen levels. They should be at a certain number, and if they drop below that number, there's a problem. Yeah. So mine kept dropping, and if they keep dropping with oxygen, then you're in real trouble, because that's the only thing they have unless they intubate or ventilate. Right. So that's when ICU came down the stairs, and you have to remember as well, and everyone's in PPE. Yes. So I only have eyes to communicate with. So this is when the conversations really became extraordinary. And I remember Charlie, and I called him Commander Charlie, because he was like a soldier the way he came down from ICU. They just appear like a different level of doctor, They just seem to have, even the PPE seems like better gear, and everything just is more, they're like, I don't know, like the superheroes of the hospital. Exactly. Or the guys who fly the airplanes in the army, so it's something like that, just the next level of soldier who comes down. And we began a conversation, and I could tell his eyes were brilliant. And whether he had any training and had to communicate with the eyes, I don't know, but they were full of compassion. It wasn't that the words were quite cold, like doctors' words can be, but his eyes were quite compassionate. And he said to me, what's going to give me the brief? He said, look, you're going to be intubated, you're going to be ventilated. I think you've got about a 65% chance of making it, which at the time I felt quite positive about. Which is a really bizarre feeling to feel positive about a 65% chance. Yeah. Then the difficult bit came, and that was, he said, look, you need to phone people before you go under, because we don't know if you're going to wake up. So I said, okay. So, and I had some sedation in me. So, I probably wasn't fully with it like I am now talking to you. I had to have a WhatsApp call with Jen, my wife, and my two kids, Jacob and Robin. And the three of them were in lockdown at this stage, I think. So we just, they were all there. And it was so easy for me to sit there and just rant on about what I'm going through, whereas they could lose their dad. So if you just let them talk and you don't interrupt and you actually just keep it zipped, they kind of get to an area of hope and they get there on their own.
Yeah.
So, and it's a much more powerful thing to get to than me saying, for me planting the idea in their heads.
Yeah.
If they can get to the idea of hope on their own, it's far more powerful because it's their own. So I chatted to the three of them, and it was tough. The most difficult conversation I've ever had to involve myself in. No conversation like that can go terribly well, but it went as best as it could, I think, and they were left with hope, and that's all that mattered. And we sort of I went to them individually towards the end with some kind of sage advice.
Yes.
It was really surreal.
Yeah.
Like I went to, because Jacob used to be, not now, but he used to be quite an angry young man. Don't get angry, don't blame. This is just what it is. This is just the way the world is right now. And for Robin, it was about letting go of, she's quite controlling and trying to be free. And, so having those kind of sage words. And to be fair, Eleanor, when you're in that state, when you haven't slept for almost 2 weeks and when you are relying on oxygen to breathe, all you want is to be put to sleep. I just want to break from the whole thing.
Yeah.
And when I saw the anaesthetist come around the corner, I just couldn't have been happier, and so I was put out pretty quickly. And then I had 6 days in what's called a 6-day coma. Now, it wasn't intended to be 6 days. It just happened that I came out of the coma on the 6th day.
How did your family cope? Because it's interesting to me to hear you say how you'd said your goodbyes effectively over a WhatsApp call. And as somebody who's had those conversations, when my husband was dying, my little boys were by his bedside and I was sitting on the bedside, and we both sort of said, now then, make sure you pass your exams. Yeah. All these things. It's almost like, if I say this when I'm dying, you might listen to me, And I also know, as the person that was left behind, how awful it is, because you're the one that's carrying it all. How did Jen cope? Because she wouldn't have been able to visit, presumably. No, she wasn't able to visit. We were only able to do WhatsApps, or she talked to me through the matron. I have found out, though, that she was, no sleep, up all night. I think, it's like anything, Eleanor. I'm sure, it's for me in the coma, certainly for the first 3 days in that coma, I was probably the luckiest guy in the family because I was knocked out. I know Jacob was holding her hand through those nights. I'm not just saying Robin here. Bless Robin. No. She was doing her fair share of work as well. But, he the son often steps up. I've got twins, but the elder one definitely suddenly just turned into the man of the house. And he hadn't been asked to, but he did. And I think they sometimes just want to take on that role, don't they? Because they feel it's their place.
Yeah. Making sure that she was getting some food down her. So, she went into crazy stress mode. So no doubt in many ways it was worse for them. Yeah, definitely worse for them.
Yeah.
I mean, the hallucinations. I mean, I was hallucinating that there was orgies going on between the men-only consultants. What's that about? They were putting on Broadway shows.
Well, I must say, as hallucinations go, they don't sound like that once. Could have been worse.
And I tell you, the nurse was always brilliant. I would say to the nurse, can you see what's going on in that room? And I never went into the detail of what it was. And she'd just go, yes, Barra, don't worry, it's totally fine. They never actually confronted what you were thinking. It's obviously part of the treatment. But the hallucinations are from just no sleep and the amount of drugs they put into.
Yeah.
I didn't have any scary hallucinations. I had one where there was a shaman dancing over the bodies of young intubated patients. That was surreal.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't scary. It was just, that's happening. I sort of had a logical mind towards it, even though it was obviously something completely illogical. I'm still not convinced none of those things happened.
Really?
I think the Broadway show might have happened because those guys need to release some steam. I'm sure they were doing some weird stuff post midnight. And I know they don't like the hero narrative, and I know they don't like that kind of stuff. And the clapping, it was getting a bit kind of, let's move on from that. And I know all they want is to be paid more.
Yes.
And that's all of course, that's what they should be getting. But Eleanor, they kind of are superheroes, and they kind of do stuff that's so humbling. It's just embarrassing, especially in the voiceover world, to say that I've ever worked a day in my life. So the first 3 days I was completely in the coma. And then on the latter 3 days, what they do is they bring you into a present coma, which is you're slightly more aware of what's going on. A tube was inserted into me and I was on a ventilator, and the tube goes all the way down into your lungs. Now I wasn't aware of any tube. It was very strange. Even though I'd been told there was going to be a tube, I wasn't aware of a tube. I was aware of a bag that sat on my chest. And now and again, a nurse would come and she'd pump that bag. And that had the most horrific, enormous effect of you looking for the deepest, strongest cough you could find and just try and shift this stuff that's in there. All that COVID poison that's in there. So that was horrendous but effective. So I was sort of presently awake during the final 3 days of the coma. And the 6th day of the coma was really interesting because there was a battle going on between my mind and body on the 6th day of the coma. My body, I didn't realize this at the time because obviously I went with what my mind believed, but my body was actually trying to kick the tube out. It was trying to get rid of the tube because it was trying to independently breathe. But my mind was convinced that I was dying. This is it. It's over. Because, my body was kind of not convulsing, but it was moving and it was kicking and it was trying to, I wasn't right. I was worried. I was panicking. I was full of anxiety. There was one particular nurse, Andrew, who, bless him, it was just extraordinary. He was there's somebody who just has built-in empathy. He was doing 12-hour shifts and then he was on the phone to Jen and the kids afterwards, hours afterwards, giving them updates, yeah. Compared to the other extreme, which is doctors just giving you very clinical information and, I've got to go now, putting the phone down. So, really extraordinary guy. And I had a flip chart and pen when I was in my present coma and I wrote, please don't go. I didn't want him to go off his shift. And then another nurse came in and she sort of took over. And exactly probably what I needed, very stern, told Andrew, go home. But yeah, and I was so I was going through this phase, my mind, this is it, it's over, it's absolutely over. But what I didn't realize, my body was actually trying to live. So next thing I was put under it again. They must have increased the sedation, gone again. And this time I woke up. And when I did wake up, the tube was gone, the tube was out.
Right.
Now, what I noticed was there was about 12 doctors around the bed, which I thought at the time was a bit top heavy, but I didn't realize. What I found out later was I was the only survivor at the time to come out of intubation. And there were 60 people in there with me. So because I was the first one to actually come out, they got the whole team round the bed as a motivating exercise, Now that was a super help.
Yeah.
And that narrative was a super help to recovery because they were saying, you're the first guy out. They called me soldier. They really gave me teeth in the game. And I think this is where I was able to keep apathy at bay. I was able to keep giving up at bay, just playing the victim, handing it all over to the doctors. That's where it's really dangerous when you're fighting a disease. Because when you feel listened to, and then a consultant turns around to you and says, okay, Barra, in about, by this afternoon, I want you to start doing breathing exercises. And those breathing exercises are the most difficult thing to do when your lungs are so packed full of COVID and you've been in a 6-day coma, you have no strength. I mean, a coma of any duration, like I've heard of people being in comas for 42 days. I have no idea how those people are coping because 6 days I felt 90.
Really?
Yeah, because everything is just turned off.
Yeah, so your entire body's turned off. You're not exercising any muscles whatsoever. So the longer you lie flat, the more your body will just almost deteriorate, won't it?
Absolutely. And you've only got a feeding tube going into you, so you're not getting the kind of quality of food you really should be getting. It was unbelievable, Eleanor, that experience, because I had to learn how to swallow again.
Really?
I forgot how to swallow. And I remember they came with a glass of water and it was a real moment. We were all standing around and I remember the consultant saying to me, we're not sure where the water's going to go. And I was like, well, where do we think it's going to go? You have these surreal conversations. Yeah. Where do we think it's going to go? And it might go straight into your lungs. Let's just see how we go. And it was one of the most emotional moments, and even more emotional than the conversation I had with Jen and the kids before I went into the coma. When I felt that water go down into my throat, I will never, ever take water for granted again. I promise myself that, and I never will. It was the most extraordinary feeling to be able to do it independently. Now, we didn't know where it had gone, but we knew pretty quickly it had gone into the stomach because I threw it up pretty quickly. And they were like, oh, that's really good news. That's really good news. That means it's gone into the stomach. Yeah. That's really good news. It means you're functioning good. I had to learn how to walk. It's extraordinary how the mind just, when you rely on machines, the mind just forgets. Yeah. And it doesn't take long. It doesn't take long to get back into it, but it does take, you're looking at your feet and okay, that's my right foot. I need to move my right foot now forward. It's just not as natural as it was before the coma. It was absolutely amazing from that point of view. So, I slowly but steadily began to show improvement. I mentioned sepsis, that did come in, but that went away pretty quick, which is great news. Yeah. They just pumped everything into me. God knows what antivirals they threw into my system. Everything, pneumonia, drugs, everything that they could think of. And obviously something worked. But there was one particular nurse who I have called Nurse Ratchet. Yeah, I mean, we know why. And I do know her real name, and I'm never giving the real names of these people because at the end of the day, one bad apple in a bunch of, I think is probably fair return. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And they save your life. But she was extraordinary because When I had the oxygen mask on after the coma, because you have to keep oxygen going into the system, it was an extraordinary mask that it was described by the doctors as putting your head out the window while your car is doing 80 miles an hour on the M25. You know, that kind of, you know, it's very surprising breathing. It's not normal breathing. So impossible to sleep. And when you cough, the amount of gunk, sorry, listeners, the amount of gunk coming into the mask had to be cleaned out. And sometimes every 3 or 4 minutes by the nurse. And it was a crappy job. I get it. Some of them did it with a kindness, but she said to me, and it was on the night shift, so it was even more kind of scary than normal. She said to me, I'm not cleaning out that mask. You know, you're going to have to swallow what you cough up.
Which presumably is certainly not something that really wants to be in your stomach. You're coughing it for a reason.
No, absolutely. And then the body started puking it up. So, you know, it didn't last long. And that situation didn't last long. And I had no strength to clean the mask myself. I mean, I got to a stage in a few days where I was able to do that. And again, that was a real moment of independence. But anyway, listen, she was scared. She was absolutely frightened. And I remember I was so sedated. I did try to engage, you know, asking if she had kids, you know, what part of it, was she from Lewisham? What part of Lewisham? Something that could connect us where I could get some empathy going from her. But it just wouldn't work. She had no time for it. I think she was scared out of her wits, perhaps of getting COVID, the shift that lies ahead. Yeah.
I understand that, because especially in March last year, nobody knew what they were dealing with, really, did they? And, you know, to have to go into that working environment every single day, I know exactly what you're saying. I think there's got to be a reason why somebody is so unpleasant, and it's their problem, not yours. And
it's usually self-doubt or fear.
Yeah,
and
of course it is.
I'm sure she was full of both. Anyway, that was one night. That was but an example. And there was probably some setbacks in that, because I remember getting so stressed and, you know, trying to communicate with doctors the following day what happened, but I just couldn't get it onto paper or whatever. Anyway, it went away pretty quickly. And, you know, the focus on recovery returned pretty quickly the next day. There was an extraordinary moment, and it was actually the next day and just what I needed. And I call this guy Nurse Nice Eyes, because he just happened to pass by the bed. When you have this oxygen mask on, sometimes it pops off because of the sheer pressure of the oxygen. And when it pops off, it needs to be reattached reasonably quickly. And for some reason, I had no nurse near me. It popped off, and this random nurse came by, and I could tell from his eyes that he was full of sense of humor. And I could tell just from his eyes that he was saying, imagine if I hadn't been around, you know, as he's reattaching the mask, kind of laughing. You know? And I just wrote down, and it's a really good example of a compliment to a stranger and the effect it can have. And I didn't do it out of thinking I'm going to compliment him now to get a result. It wasn't like that. There was no agenda. He had lovely eyes. So I wrote down the flip chart and part, you know, you've got a lovely pair of eyes. And he just looked at me, right? And I swear to you, the next thing he did was he took the deepest breath. Now, whether he knew I hadn't seen a face, whether he knew I needed to see a face, I don't know. But he read that comment, looked at me, took a massive breath, and removed all of his PPE, showed me his full face, and just smiled at me and winked like that, and then reattached all his PPE and walked off.
Oh, how wonderful.
And I'll always remember his face. I didn't get his name, but I'll always remember his face.
So if you bump into him on a night out in Lewisham one day when we're all allowed out.
I am going to grab him. He's not going to know what hit him. Could you imagine if I picked the wrong guy? Anyway, so he's not even a nurse. So that was pretty cool. And then I just slowly but surely began to, you know, get a little bit better. When the story became so much more than just about me was when I went they just threw me into some recovery area. You know, in ICU, they just move the beds around. They don't know, you know, next second you're up against reception. The next second you're at the back door, you know. And because I was the only one recovering, they didn't have a clue what to do with me. So, you know, and rightly so, they were looking at everybody else in their comas. So I ended up being shoved into some kind of, you know, abandoned ward down the corridor somewhere. It just felt like people had just dropped and gone. And it was just me. And I had to have a nurse there. And, you know, we had about 2 hours where she said, you know, do you want to listen to anything on the radio? I said, yeah. She said, do you like magic? I said, yeah, stick on magic. We'll have a listen. And then she was sort of even ordering food off a menu. The sun was beaming through the window and I could see the Lewisham train station. But that was the first time I realized there was a lockdown. I didn't know there was a lockdown. So I said to her, why is this train station so empty? You know, and she was saying, oh, there's a lockdown you haven't heard and blah, blah, blah. So that was interesting. And then bursting through the doors, about 3 consultants. And they told her, we're bringing 20 new bodies who need to be intubated and ventilated. They got COVID. And just the fear in her face. And I could just, you know, looking at her, and I could just see from her eyes only because of PPE, but I could still see it. she was like, I'm on my own. I can't, I need more help. Then there was a call from matron, and then there was another nurse on the way, a whole two. Mm-hmm. And that's when she said, what am I going to do with Barra? And they said, well, just shove Barra into the corner for now. He'd be fine. You can clean out your own mask, Barra, can't you? At this stage, I was able to, I had a suction pump, and I was able to clean out my own mask. So I was getting more independent. So I said, yeah. They put me into the corner. And for the next 6 hours, I just watched, because I had no curtain drawn in front of me. I watched these two nurses intubate and with consultants, intubate and ventilate 20 patients. And it was just watching them work, watching them talk. You'd have one consultant saying to another consultant, look, I've ventilated the last 6. I'm exhausted. Somebody else needs to step up and ventilate here. And if you don't know how to do it, I'll show you how to do it. And it was just, this training going on at the same time, because it's a very, skilled thing to do, to ventilate someone and to intubate somebody. And I just watched it play out. And it just watching these guys pull together, work together, and talk to each other with such respect, and, in such an environment of chaos and, war. I mean, it felt like it was a war at that stage, a war zone. It was really humbling. And then they said, okay, I think of another sort of 12 hours, they were going to get me back onto a ward away from ICU. First of all, they said, you're going back on a COVID ward, which I've struggled with, but I had no choice. But what really hit me there was I didn't get a chance to kind of say goodbye to anybody in ICU. And I'd been with them for approximately 10, 11 days at this stage. And, I needed that goodbye. I needed that for my own mental health in a way, to kind of say thanks to these guys. Didn't get the chance. You just get pushed out. And I get it. They're too busy. They haven't got time to be sitting around talking to me. Understood. So I got put back onto a COVID ward. And that's, Elinor, where for me, I need to get out of here now. Because there's I could hear the 3 men that I was sharing the ward with. At this stage, I knew a COVID cough. I knew exactly what COVID sounded like. They were having conversations with their wife and kids that I was having 12 days ago, and I just could not deal with it. I remember the nurse coming to me. I just kept saying, how do I get out of here? She said, well, you're going to have to eat solids. You're going to have to get your catheter off your downstairs department. You're going to have to show that you've got some strength and that you can, fine. She said, but can I give you my biggest tip? I said, yeah. She goes, when the doctor comes around, make sure you're dressed, you're sitting in your chair, and you got your full strength face on.
Yeah.
Fine. I said, give me a heads up when the doctor's coming. She said, yeah, okay, I will. So she headed off. But the thing is, I had to really keep my station clean because, in a COVID ward, you can't leave to go to the toilet. So everybody's given their own kind of portable toilet. So you're, without sounding disgusting, but you are eating and defecating in the same place. So you've got to keep that area clean. Otherwise, God knows what other infection could come in. So I just really kept on top of it. I wasn't sleeping well, and I'm still on oxygen. My SATs were doing okay. And I forced myself to eat, forced myself to drink more water, drink tea. And when the doctor came around, I was bang on that chair, sitting up, trying to get out. Now, they admit now that they probably discharged me about a week too early, but I had to get out. I just had to get home.
Yeah.
And I remember the 2 doctors, there was 2 doctors standing at the end of the bed, and they had no idea how to get me home. So I basically sort of satisfied the tests. I was able to walk up and down the ward for a bit. My SATs were maintaining now without oxygen, enough to be sent home. Because I was the first survivor, they had no idea whether to get me an ambulance home, a taxi home. There was discussions, do you think he's still infectious? Someone would go, yeah, definitely still infectious. Somebody else, no, I don't think he is infectious. Literally no one had a clue what to do. So it was getting late and later and later and later. And I just stood up and I just said to the 2 of them, I'm going to go now. And I could just see the 2 of them just went, fine, because they just needed the decision to be taken out of their hands. And I got it. They couldn't figure out a way to sign me out. So I think if the patient says he wants to go and he's satisfied all the tests, what can we do? We have to let him go. So I walked out, pajamas and slippers, and I got back. I got an Uber. Can you believe I got an Uber? And I got into the back of the Uber, and my eyes were so sunken, I just looked like I was on death's door, mask still on. And £6 later, I was home, and just got myself into the loft. Jen had made the loft into a, it's got its own loo. It's all been converted, and I just basically became my hospital bed, if you like, for about 3 months. And I just stayed here doing the breathing exercises.
Were you able to spend time with your family?
No, because they were isolating. They were still in lock. They were isolated for 14 days, and then they had to isolate because I'd come home for another 14 days. So everybody else, we had friends and neighbours doing our shopping.
Yeah.
Neighbours 4 doors down, picking up prescriptions, that kind of thing.
So on the one hand, they were delighted to see you, and on the other hand, it was like, cheers, Dad. Could you not have just timed it right so we could have had a few days out?
Exactly. They were extraordinary.
Yeah.
Jacob just, talk about watching a boy become a man. And, Jen was just delivering dinners to the loft door for at least 2 weeks. We kept our distance and we spoke. She felt quite sick with it. So she had a bad cough at this stage. So she had it. Jacob had it. He picked up a big cough. Robin lost her taste and smell. So the whole family went down with it. I was the only one that was hospitalised.
You just have to go one better, don't you?
Yeah, this is it. Just slow process. But you know what? I tell you something. Jacob's had it 3 times.
Really?
He needs to be in a lab. He went to UD. He lost his taste and smell, and then over Christmas he got it again.
Wow.
Because he did a test because he's worried about me, so he did a test, and he spent his Christmas day in his bedroom on Zoom.
Oh, no.
But my family has been absolutely ravished by this thing, and it's extraordinary how, and we all are now, I think, feeling it and knowing people who's getting it.
Yes.
I remember back in March, a year ago, I was the only one people knew who got it. Now I feel like everybody else is getting it now or knows somebody who's got it.
It's only getting closer, isn't it? It feels like it's on its way. I'm beginning to know people closer and closer to me, one of whom has died. Not somebody I knew personally, but, we had several mutual friends. And again, youngish guy, cyclist, all the hallmarks of a healthy bloke that had years to live. My auntie's had it very badly. Everybody seems to have had it. And yet there are still people around who deny its existence, which drives me insane.
It's just people who have no experience of it or don't know anybody who's had it. It's those people, and until you've experienced it, and you've had a real near death brush with it, that's when it's interesting. There is stuff I just want to mention about long COVID. And I think people who is very much a thing, as we know. Weirdly, Jen is suffering a lot more from the long COVID than I am.
Even though she didn't suffer from the main illness so much.
Correct. Right. Yeah. And I think it's coming out that women are getting it more than men. So the long COVID side of it. So men get it more severely, but perhaps come out of it a bit quicker. Whereas women tend to suffer it more longer.
Women just suffer for the longer anyway.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this has proven that man flu was always correct. We suffer more from flu. I'm telling you. COVID has proven that. That's COVID's great gift.
I'd like to see you tell her that on camera.
Yeah. Maybe she's not here. Can you tell?
I can tell. Oh dear! I'm sorry to hear that she's still suffering. That's rotten. Having to have carried that weight by herself for all those days that you're in hospital and just lying there.
I was very angry initially, and I remember being angry with the government. I remember Michael Gove, doing a press conference. I'll never forget. It was the second day I was home. And he stood up and he said, we have an exit plan for COVID, people recovering from COVID. We get them home by ambulance. We have an exit plan. 2 days previously, I was in the back of an Uber. It's just the ability to stand up and just tell these porky pies, it's an extraordinary thing that these guys do. But so I was angry, but my anger's kind of dissipated now. And because of the work I do, which is engaging in healthier communication with people, with myself initially and with everyone else around us, it's kind of made me a kinder, more respectful person, which is good.
You've been listening to Tales from the Tannoy with Elinor Hamilton and Barra Fitzgibbon, with music from Beats Bakery. This podcast was produced by Karl Svenson from Tadah Media. If you've enjoyed this episode of Tales from the Tannoy, then please subscribe and leave a review from wherever you get your podcasts.